My name is Clara Evans. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 8 years, I have lived in a modest two-story house in a sleepy suburb of Salt Lake City. The silence in this house has become a living thing, an oppressive weight that presses down on me from the moment I wake until I finally fall into a restless sleep. It's only been a few days, but the quiet has already worn pathways into my sanity. My husband, Richard, is gone. It was a heart attack, they said. Swift, unexpected, and final. He was a man always in a hurry, always chasing the next deadline, the next flight, the next deal. It seems fitting, in a cruel way, that his exit was just as abrupt. Next door, in a small, tidy brick house identical to mine, lives Leo Walsh. He's a few years younger than me, I think, with kind, dark eyes and a reserved demeanor. In the 5 years he's lived there, our interactions have been limited to polite waves from across our driveways and brief, weather-related chats while grabbing the mail. He seems like a decent man, an accountant or something similarly steady. He's predictable, quiet. I used to appreciate the peaceful distance between our homes, the unspoken agreement of mutual privacy. Now that distance feels like a chasm, and the peace feels like a punishment. The funeral was yesterday. A blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and faces I barely recognized. I stood there, a porcelain doll of a widow, accepting sympathies for a loss that felt both immense and strangely distant. Today, the day after we put Richard in the ground, the quiet became unbearable. I walked through the rooms of our life together, his presence lingering like a ghost in the armchair he favored, the scent of his cologne still clinging to the closet door. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I knew I couldn't stay here a moment longer. My hands were shaking, so I made a cup of chamomile tea, not because I wanted it, but because the ritual gave my hands something to do. Clutching the warm ceramic mug like a lifeline, I walked out my front door, across the small patch of lawn that separated our properties, and up the 3 concrete steps to Leo's porch. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was I doing? But the thought of returning to that suffocating silence was worse. I knocked. He opened the door a moment later, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to gentle concern. He was dressed for a day at home, wearing a soft gray hoodie and comfortable-looking sweatpants. His hair was a little messy. For a second, I almost turned and ran, but then he just looked at me, waiting. My own reflection stared back from the storm door glass, a woman in a long black coat, my hair pulled back messily, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Hi, Leo," I managed, my voice a fragile whisper. "Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" He didn't hesitate, just stepped aside and held the door open for me. I was grateful he didn't ask any questions. Inside, his house was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and books. He guided me to the living room couch and took the now lukewarm cup of tea from my trembling hands, setting it on the coffee table before heading to the kitchen to make a fresh one. I sat stiffly, my hands clenched in my lap, my eyes fixed on a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. He returned with 2 steaming mugs and sat in the armchair opposite me. The silence that filled his living room was different from the one in my house. His was peaceful, a soft blanket. Mine was a void. After what felt like an eternity, the words finally came, spilling out of me in a hushed, broken tone. "It's too quiet next door," I whispered, staring into the steam rising from my cup. "I thought I could handle it, but I don't want to be alone right now." He simply nodded, his gaze compassionate. "You don't have to explain," he said, his voice calm and even. We sat like that for a while, sipping our tea, letting the quiet settle around us. It wasn't awkward. It felt like a shared breath, a moment of reprieve. Eventually, I began to talk. The words weren't planned. They just flowed out, a slow, steady leak of truths I had held inside for years. I spoke of Richard, of how the vibrant connection we once shared had faded into a polite arrangement. I explained how, over the last few years, we had become more like roommates than husband and wife, our lives running on parallel tracks that never intersected. I wasn't weeping. It was a confession, not a lament. The tears for that part of our life had been shed long ago, in private, lonely moments. I looked at him, my neighbor, this practical stranger, and voiced the most terrible truth of all. "I know it sounds awful," I said, my voice barely audible, "but part of me feels like I've already grieved this, like I lost him emotionally long before I lost him physically." I expected a flicker of judgment, of pity, but his expression remained open and accepting. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just nodded and listened. That was all I needed. It was everything I needed. Before I left, as I stood by the door, my gaze swept over his living room. The stacks of books, the worn throw blanket on the couch, the simple, uncluttered space. A faint, genuine smile touched my lips. "It's warm here," I said, the words carrying more weight than he could know. And then I was gone, stepping back into the chill evening air and walking back to my empty house. But something had shifted. A small connection had been forged in that quiet living room, a fragile bridge between his world and mine. The next morning, the house felt even emptier. The warmth I'd felt at Leo's had evaporated, leaving behind the familiar hollow chill. I tried to be productive. I had thank you notes to write, a mountain of paperwork to sort through, Richard's life now contained in manila folders. But my mind was a fog. All I could see was Leo's face, his look of quiet understanding. All I could feel was the memory of sitting on his couch, holding that cup of tea like it was an anchor in a storm. The raw honesty of our conversation lingered with me, a strange comfort. It had been years since I'd been that truthful with anyone, including myself. By noon, I realized I hadn't eaten. I was staring at Richard's life insurance policy, the words blurring into meaningless shapes, when a thought took hold. Leo was probably working from home. He probably forgot to eat too. It was a flimsy pretext, but it was enough. I drove the few blocks to Charlie's Deli, a place Richard had never liked, and ordered 2 sandwiches, a turkey and Swiss for him, a safe bet, and a roast beef for me. Walking back to my car, the 2 brown paper bags felt heavy with intention. I felt a pang of guilt, a voice in my head whispering, "It's too soon." But the thought of sitting alone in that kitchen was more daunting. I walked straight past my own front door and knocked on his again. He opened it, looking surprised but not unwelcoming. This time, I wasn't wearing a coat of mourning. I was in jeans and a gray hoodie that had been Richard's, something I'd pulled on for comfort that now felt like a costume. I hadn't bothered with makeup. I held up the bags. "I figured you probably forgot to eat," I said, managing a weak smile. "I almost did. Thought I'd bring lunch if you don't mind." He didn't answer right away, just looked at me for a beat, and then he stepped aside. This time, walking into his house felt different, less like an intrusion and more like coming somewhere familiar. It felt natural. He suggested the back patio. The sky was overcast, the air cool and damp with the promise of rain, but it felt good to be outside. We sat at a small metal table, the silence punctuated by the crinkling of paper as we unwrapped our sandwiches. At first, we ate without speaking. I kept my eyes fixed on the line of tall aspens behind his fence, their leaves trembling in the breeze. I felt him glance at me a few times, but I couldn't meet his gaze. Finally, I broke the quiet. "It's strange," I said, my voice low. "I thought I'd feel more devastated, you know? I thought I'd wake up crying, screaming, something. But instead, I just feel empty, like I'm walking through someone else's life." He didn't respond, letting my words hang in the air. His patience was a gift. "I've had this knot in my chest for so long, Leo," I continued, still looking at the trees. "Even before Richard died, it's like the grief started years ago, when things between us changed, when we stopped really seeing each other." I took a shaky breath. We used to be so close. I really did love him. But his work became his life. He traveled constantly, and when he was home, he was distant, preoccupied. I started eating dinner alone, even when he was in the same house. We slept in the same bed, but it felt like there were miles between us. Finally, I turned to meet his eyes. They were steady, compassionate. "Have you ever felt like you're slowly disappearing in your own home?" He gave a small, slow nod, a gesture of understanding that went deeper than words. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. A soft, almost embarrassed laugh escaped me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dump all of this on you. I didn't know who else to talk to. You don't have to apologize, he said, his voice gentle. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with. The sincerity in his words made my throat tighten. For the next hour, we talked. We moved away from the heavy topics of grief and loss and drifted into easier waters. We talked about movies we liked, our favorite coffee shops in the city. He told me about the time he accidentally sent a company-wide email with a typo in the subject line that said pubic announcement instead of public. I laughed, a real full-bodied laugh that startled me. It felt like a muscle I hadn't used in years. In that moment, I felt a flicker of the person I used to be. As we talked, my hand rested on the cool metal of the patio table. At one point, his hand brushed against mine as he reached for his napkin. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a spark through me. It lingered for a second, just long enough for both of us to register it, before I pulled my hand back gently. My face flushed. A storm of conflicting emotions, warmth, guilt, confusion, fear, swirled inside me. I stood up abruptly. I should go, I said, my voice suddenly tight. This is probably too soon. I don't want you to think I'm using you as some kind of emotional crutch. He stood up too, his expression unreadable. You're not, he said simply, and I knew he meant it. I hesitated at his back door. I just didn't want to be alone today. He nodded. Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk, or not talk, I'm here. There was an unspoken weight in the silence that followed. We were both aware of it. A shift, a current of warmth and connection that had taken us both by surprise. I gave him a slow nod. Thanks, Leo, really. Then I turned and walked across the grass separating our homes, my arms crossed tightly over my chest as if to hold myself together. The breeze caught my hair, and I felt untethered, adrift. Something had changed. No lines had been physically crossed, but an invisible threshold had been breached. A quiet, unexpected connection had begun, and I had a feeling it wasn't going away. The following day started under a heavy gray sky. Rain felt imminent. I sat at my own kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the wall. I was supposed to be making a list, sorting out affairs, but my mind refused to focus. It kept drifting next door, replaying our conversations, refeeling that brief electric touch of his hand. His presence lingered in my thoughts, a quiet warmth that stood in stark contrast to the cold reality of my house. I couldn't shake his words, or the way he looked at me, not with pity, but with a simple, profound sense of recognition. Sometime after my uneaten lunch, I found myself standing at my kitchen window, the one that overlooked his backyard. I told myself I was just looking at the weather, but I was looking for him, and there he was. He was standing near the edge of his porch, arms wrapped around himself, mirroring the exact posture I had adopted so many times in the last few days. He looked small and uncertain from this distance, a man on the edge of a decision. I watched him for what felt like a long time. Then I watched him go back inside. The minutes ticked by, 10, then 15. I started to think I had imagined the whole thing, this strange connection. Then I heard a knock on my front door. My heart gave a little jump. I knew it was him. When I opened it, he stood there in a navy blue sweater and dark jeans. He looked exhausted, but his eyes held a quiet intensity. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I breathed, stepping aside without a thought. He walked past me into the living room, a space he'd never been in before. He moved slowly, hesitantly, his gaze taking in the room that held all my history, all my ghosts. "I wasn't planning to come over," he said after a moment, his back to me. "I've been going back and forth for the past hour, but I was worried about you." The simple admission hung in the air between us. "You don't need a reason," I said softly. He turned and finally looked at me, then moved toward the couch and sat down, not in Richard's armchair, but on the far end of the sofa, I sat in the armchair across from him, creating a space that felt both safe and charged. The only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant hum of traffic. "I don't know how to be alone," I confessed into the quiet, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. "I went from my parents' house straight to living with Richard. I've never known anything else. There was always someone there. Now there's just me." I saw him nod slowly, absorbing my words. "It's a hard adjustment." I let out a shaky breath. "The thing is, I felt alone for a long time, even when he was here. It's like I was mourning the end of our marriage before he was even gone." My words were heavy with a truth I had barely admitted to myself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his focus entirely on me. "That kind of loneliness is brutal," he said. "It's different when someone's there physically, but emotionally, they're a million miles away." The accuracy of his words made my eyes burn. I looked at him directly, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think it's wrong that I feel relieved to be here, talking to you? I don't feel guilty, and I feel guilty about that." He considered my question for a long moment, choosing his words with care. "No," he said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "I don't think there's a clock for grief or for connection. Sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them. That doesn't make it wrong." His validation was like a key unlocking something inside me. It felt like permission to breathe. I didn't expect to feel drawn to someone right now," I whispered, looking down at my hands, twisting the hem of my sleeve. "Neither did I," he admitted quietly. I looked around the room, at the life I was supposed to be mourning, and a wave of suffocation washed over me. "I can't stay here tonight," I said, the words tumbling out. "Not because I'm running away, but because if I sit in this house alone again, I feel like I'm going to suffocate." I knew how it sounded, dramatic, irrational, but it was the truest thing I'd ever said. It was the desperate plea of a woman at the absolute end of her rope. "You don't have to explain," he said immediately. "If you need a place to breathe, I'll make up the guest room." I blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. His kindness was so simple, so absolute, it undid me. "I didn't expect you to say that." He gave me a small, sad smile. "You're not alone, Clara." I nodded slowly, and for the first time all day, a genuine, watery smile touched my lips. Later, while I sat curled on his couch sipping chamomile tea, I could hear him moving around down the hall, pulling clean sheets from a closet, the quiet sounds of him preparing a space for me. We didn't talk much more. The silence was comfortable again, a shared understanding. Before I retreated to the guest room for the night, I knew I had to thank him properly. I walked over to where he stood in the hallway. "Thank you, Leo," I said softly. "For this, for not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a person again." And then, on impulse, I stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not a prelude to anything more. It was purely human. It was desperate gratitude. I rested my head against his shoulder, and his arms came around me, holding me steady. His embrace was firm and calm, and for a few seconds I let myself just be held. It was the kind of hug you don't forget. When we finally drew apart, I whispered, "Good night." Then I disappeared down the hall into the guest room he had prepared. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, alone in the quiet of his house, the warmth of his embrace still clinging to me like a shield. I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling that my life had just irrevocably changed. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't because of any discomfort. The guest bed was soft, the sheets clean and crisp. It was because I was so acutely aware of everything. I was aware that Leo, my quiet neighbor, was sleeping just down the hall. I was aware of the immense weight of my circumstances, a widow, just days after burying her husband, seeking refuge in another man's home. The walls of his house felt thin. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren seemed amplified. My thoughts spun in a relentless cyclone of guilt, relief, confusion, and a startling, unfamiliar flicker of hope. I kept replaying the hug in the hallway. It wasn't born of passion or desire. It was born of sheer human need. It was the kind of contact you can't fake, an honest exchange of comfort and support. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of simple, grounding touch. When the first hint of gray light began to filter through the blinds, I slipped out of bed. The house was perfectly still. I moved on silent feet, not wanting to wake him, and made my way to the kitchen. The familiar ritual of making coffee grounded me. I stood by his kitchen window, cradling the warm mug in both hands, and watched the soft dawn light spill over the fence that separated our two worlds. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft padding of his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a dark blue bathrobe, his hair sleep-tousled. His expression was calm, but his eyes were tired. He still looked handsome, but in a way that was more raw and real than the polite neighbor I'd known before. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hey," I replied with a small smile. "I made coffee." He nodded and stepped into the kitchen, taking the mug I offered him. For several minutes, we just stood there in companionable silence, sipping our coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. There was no awkwardness, only a shared, restful quiet. Eventually, I moved to the small kitchen table and sat down, pulling the blanket from the guest room tighter around my shoulders. I stared out the window for a long time before speaking. "I have no idea what I'm doing," I confessed to the glass. I heard him pull out the chair across from me and sit. "I don't think you're supposed to, Clara," he said gently. "You're figuring it out 1 minute at a time. That's enough." I nodded slowly, taking in his words. I keep thinking about how it felt yesterday, just sitting here, talking, breathing. For the first time in years, it felt like I got a tiny piece of myself back. I finally turned to meet his gaze. His eyes held no judgment, only depth. "Richard and we weren't really a couple anymore. We lived together, shared a life on paper, but emotionally, we were two strangers occupying the same space. I didn't even realize how empty I'd become until I left that house." I didn't need him to respond. I just needed him to listen. I needed to say it all out loud, to give voice to the secrets I had carried for so long. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't take the silence anymore," I finished, my voice thick with emotion. "And now, I don't want to go back. Not yet." He didn't push me. He didn't question it. He simply let me stay. The day unfolded with an easy, unplanned rhythm. I made us scrambled eggs and toast, the simple domestic act feeling surprisingly normal. He needed to do some laundry, and I found myself helping him sort it, a real laugh bubbling up when I discovered a single rogue pink sock among his whites. In the afternoon, we took a walk around the neighborhood, a slow, meandering loop under the now-clearing sky. We didn't hold hands, but our arms brushed against each other a few times, small sparks of contact that went unacknowledged but were deeply felt by us both. The day moved with a gentle, healing pace. That evening, he made a simple dinner of pasta and salad. We ate at his kitchen table, and afterward, we migrated to the couch. I curled my legs up beneath me, holding a fresh cup of tea. He sat beside me, close but not touching. A nature documentary played softly on the television, its sounds a soothing backdrop. "It's strange," I said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I feel peace here, like I'm allowed to just be. I haven't felt that in so long." He turned to look at me. "You don't have to rush anything," he said, his voice low and certain. "There's no script for this." I looked up at him, my eyes searching his for something, permission, understanding. I wasn't sure what. "Do you think it's wrong?" I asked again, needing the reassurance. "That I don't feel bad about being here?" "No," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I think you're doing what you need to do to survive. That's never wrong." As if pulled by an invisible string, my head leaned against his shoulder. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. His arm came around me, not in a forceful or suggestive way, but in a gesture that was purely supportive, purely steady. And in that quiet moment, something shifted palpably in the space between us. I tilted my head up to look at him, and our faces were closer than they had ever been. His eyes searched mine. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. And then, slowly, tentatively, I leaned in. My lips met his, a soft, careful press that was more of a question than a statement. It was a single kiss, not filled with fireworks or passion, but with a profound sense of connection. Two lonely souls finding a moment of solace. I pulled back almost immediately, a wave of panic and guilt washing over me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my eyes dropping to my lap. "You don't have to be," he replied, his voice just as quiet. We didn't kiss again. Instead, I leaned into him, resting my head against the solid warmth of his chest. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, in the quiet, in the stillness. A line had been crossed, a monumental one, and neither of us wanted to name it. At the time, I don't think I understood the depth of the bond that had formed between us. We were just two people, trying to figure out how to live with the lives we'd been handed. The quiet, shared moments, the morning coffees, the silent evenings, were starting to feel like something more than just survival. They were beginning to feel like life. After that one hesitant kiss, a silent understanding passed between us. We both knew we needed to slow down, to give the moment space to breathe. It wasn't a retreat. It was an act of preservation. We couldn't rush into something new while the ashes of my old life were still so warm. So I went back to my own house. For the next few days, I stayed there. The decision was agonizing, but necessary. I told Leo I needed to face it, to clean it, to sort through the memories that clung to every surface. He understood completely. He didn't push or crowd me. He let me be. But every day, like a ritual, he would text me in the morning, "Coffee's on." And every day I would walk across the lawn and sit on his couch for an hour, sipping the hot, dark liquid while we talked. The grief was still a constant companion, a heavy cloak on my shoulders, but a quiet companionship was growing between us, something that didn't require grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was built on listening. Sometimes in the safety of his living room, I would cry. Other times he would say something ridiculous, like describing his failed attempt to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture, and I would find myself laughing, a sound that still felt foreign but increasingly welcome. I noticed myself smiling more, even when I was alone in my own house. His quiet, steady presence was like sunlight on a dormant plant. He was slowly, gently bringing me back to life. And I could see I was having an effect on him, too. The reserved, solitary man I'd first met was opening up. His smiles were more frequent, his laughter easier. He was finding a part of himself, just as I was finding a part of mine. We were healing. Not completely. Grief doesn't vanish. But we were learning to live alongside it, and I was learning to do the same with my own. About a month after Richard's death, I invited him over to my house for dinner. The words felt momentous as I said them. I hadn't let anyone but the funeral director inside since it happened. The house was a place of loss, the place where Richard's energetic presence had suddenly ceased. A knot of nerves tightened in my stomach as I waited for him to arrive. But this felt like a necessary step forward. I needed to reclaim this space, to prove to myself that new memories could be made here. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a gentle smile. I had cooked a simple pasta, something light and comforting. We decided to eat on the back patio, the same place Richard and I had spent so many tense, silent evenings. As the sun dipped below the Wasatch Mountains, casting long shadows across the yard, the evening air turned cool and crisp. We didn't talk much during dinner. We didn't need to. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably, as if we'd been doing this for years. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the soft clinking of our forks against the plates and the murmur of the neighborhood settling in for the night. As the sky darkened to a deep indigo and the patio lights cast a soft golden glow around us, I looked at him. The look in his eyes was different now. The sadness and uncertainty had been replaced by something steady, something sure. "I think I'm ready," I said, my voice clear in the quiet air. "Ready for what?" he asked, his expression open and curious. "Ready to let myself move forward," I explained. "I've been stuck for so long, Leo, in so many ways. I didn't know how to get out of it. But being with you, you've helped me see that it's okay. It's okay to move on, that I don't have to be defined by what I lost." My words hung in the space between us, heavy and true. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand in his. His touch was warm, solid, and utterly natural. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes told me he understood. I smiled, a real open smile that reached my eyes, and in that moment, I realized just how far I had come. This wasn't just about me getting over the past anymore. It was about finding something new, something unexpected, and something undeniably good. "I don't need to rush into anything," I continued, my thumb stroking the back of his hand. "But when I picture a future, a happy one, you're in it, and that means something to me." It was his turn to smile, a touch of nervousness mixed with relief. "I don't need to rush either," he said softly. "We'll take it as slow as you need. But I want to be there with you, Clara. I think we both deserve that." The silence that followed was full of a profound and shared understanding. There were no more questions, no more doubts, just a quiet certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together. From that night on, things were different, yet the same. We didn't launch into a whirlwind romance. Our connection was too deep, too fragile for that. We continued our quiet mornings, our long evenings. We enjoyed the simple comfort of companionship, leaning on each other more and more as the days turned into weeks. Slowly, carefully, we were building something real, something worth holding on to. A few months later, after countless shared dinners and quiet nights, I found myself waking up next to him more often than not. Our love story wasn't the loud, chaotic kind you read about in novels. It was the kind that felt steady and true, built not on grand gestures but on small, sacred moments, on shared laughter over a burnt piece of toast, on the comfort of a hand to hold during a late-night movie, on the unwavering support in each other's eyes. I was happy, truly happy, and so was he. And that's how I knew this was the right kind of new beginning. It wasn't a story about erasing the past, but about two people who found a way to heal, to honor their second chance, and to build a future together.